Welcome everybody. Hopefully you can all hear me. It's Lorraine Raguseo, Quintessential Wines, and we are here in Stellenbosch in South Africa for hopefully a wonderful tasting. If everything is with us on the technical side, I think it may well be. I'm first going to introduce all of you folks out in the United States, the writers who are with us today. Lisa Denning is the wine chef out of New York City. We have Gabe Sasso. Gabe writes for a number of outlets, including Snooth in New Jersey, but the New York area. Diane Latoul. Diane is also the Wine Lovers Journal, a blogger, and she's also out in New Jersey. Then we're moving across the country. We have Terry Sullivan and his wife, Kathy, who write a blog, Wine Trail Travels, out of Maryland. And he's actually making lunch, a South African lunch, with peri-peri spices. That's what he told me. So good luck with that. I wish we were all having a little bite of it. We have Amy Corin Power. She is in Texas, and she has another wine blog. She's called the Wine Wonquette, or on her Twitter handle, and she is with us from Texas. Michael Servin, we are now on the West Coast, and he is in Santa Barbara. And has written a number of books, articles, and written about South African wines many, many times. Deborah Parker Wong, she is with us with her class. She is a writer, and she is also an educator at Santa Rosa Junior College today. We have there her Wine 1 class of approximately 25 people or so, who are learning all about wine, and today they're learning about South African wines from the best. And last but not least, we have Christopher Null. Christopher is editor of Drink Hacker, and he is also out in California. Thank you all for joining us. We're so happy you could be with us today. As most of you know, Quintessential Wines is an importer of fine wines from all over the world. And one of our major asset is that we have only family-owned and operated wineries. This is an absolutely perfect example of that. Simonsig has been a family-owned winery for many, many years. We actually will hear all about it from Francois Milan, but we have today with us the second and third generation, which is wonderful, and you'll hear a tiny bit from them. Francois will introduce them. But I will just introduce for you the two gentlemen you see sitting over towards the left, the left on our side, the right on your side. In the middle, we have Johan Milan. Johan is the chief winemaker. Johan is one of the owners, along with his brother, Francois, who's right next to him. And Francois is the viticulturalist, and the two of them, their father was the original owner. We'll hear all about him, all about Franz Milan. But I'm going to leave it to Francois to start us off and to treat us to the third generation.
Okay, good day to you all. It's a privilege to have this tasting tonight. Since we are a family-owned business, we're in this stage of our business now that there's the next generation coming into the operations, and I'd like to introduce them to you. First of all, it is Christelle. She's my daughter. Christelle.
Hello. I'm in the finance team at Simonsig as the financial manager, and I've been working there since May 2016. My studies and my previous work experiences are in law, but mainly accounting, and I really find it satisfying now to work in the family business, being formally involved and making a difference in a business that I've known since childhood.
Okay, thank you, Christelle. And second is my son, Francois Jacques.
Hello, everybody. I've actually started working at Simonsig as a student in the tasting room, selling wines to the public, and then I officially joined the team on a permanent basis in 2011 as part of the sales and marketing team after I completed my undergrad studies in economics at the University of Stellenbosch. And ever since, I've been part of the team, and it's only been a great privilege and fun working in such a great wine business with my family. I think that's fantastic.
Okay, and then lastly, I'd like to introduce Michael. He is the son of Johan.
Hello, good day, everybody in America. My name is Michael. I've been working for Simonsig only since end of last year, but before that, I spent a couple of years in Australia doing some vintages, and then I also studied at the University of Stellenbosch, viticulture and winemaking.
Thank you, Michael. Okay, I'd like to give you some background and history of Simonsig. First of all, the name Simonsig, the name of our company, means to see or have a view of the mountains. There's a specific mountain, Simon's Mountain, and Simonsig means to see or have a view of this mountain. You will also find us on the southern tip of Africa. We're about 25 miles from Cape Town in the winelands of Stellenbosch. Now, Stellenbosch is also a university town, and Simonsig is very much a privately owned family business. Johan and I are the only shareholders, and our Milan forefathers came from France, so they were part of the French Huguenots. And they came to South Africa, to this part of the world, in 1688. The French Huguenots fled their native land, and they, after religious persecution in France. But we've been here for 10 generations now, and we're very much part of Africa. But on this specific property, we're now in the 3rd generation. Now, the typical topography of Stellenbosch is these mountains you'll have in the background. It's almost like wallpaper. And then the roaming red hills all around Stellenbosch. Now, these hills are mainly sedimentary clay soils, and it's all water deposited over millions of years. But these hills are not that steep. You can actually plant vineyards right on top of these hills of about 400 meters above sea level. We have in total, our vineyard plantings are a total of 214 hectares, and it's planted with the classic varieties of Chenin Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot, Tosh, Shiraz, Cabernet Sauvignon, and Pinot Noir. Now, our harvest period is usually about 12 weeks, starting in early January until the end of March. We pick mostly by hand, but only a small portion is picked by machine or grape harvester. Now, 50% of our crop is red grapes and 50% red wine. And all the crushing and bottling and labeling is done on our estate, ensuring the high standards and for the wine quality. And we dispatch our wines to more than 50 countries all over the world. What you might also find interesting is that typically in South Africa, most of the the staff live on the property. So we have 55 laborer cottages on the property, and that represents about 260 people. So there's quite a social responsibility towards the community. So sometimes I am acting as the mayor of this small town. And because 50% of our staff are women, we have a creche facility since 1979 and a daycare center where we have staff members to look after these children every day. We have about 30 kids from 3 months old to 3 years old. Now, what is also important is this year we commemorate the 50 years of the Simonsig brand. Now, in South Africa, that is, it might sound as a very short period of time, but in fact, we are one of the oldest wine estates in South Africa. So we have the anniversary of Chenin Blanc, also continuously being bottled for 50 years. and also the bottling facility has been going on for 50 years. My father, Frans Milan, he was very much a pioneer and entrepreneur in the South Africa's wine industry, and we can proudly say that he is the father of the MCC, or Kap Klassiek Kaapse Vonkel. And he was also one of the founding members of the Stellenbosch wine route, which is very much tourism driven and brings a lot of visitors to our part of the world. Okay, I think that's a short introduction, and now I hand over to Johan for the wine tasting.
Thank you, Francois, for the background information. Obviously, through the technology, you're also capable of asking questions. And I just want to introduce you to one of my colleagues in the cellar, Debbie Thompson, who has been the Simonsig red wine maker since 1999, so almost 20 years. So she'll give us some input a bit later on the red wines that we're going to taste tonight. Francois did mention that Kaapse Vonkel, which means Cape Sparkle in our native language, Afrikaans, was initiated by my father in 1971. And we were the first and also the only producer of that style of bottle fermented sparkling wine for about 10 years. And then around about the early 90s, we realized that we have to find a name that would distinguish it from carbonated sparkling wine, which was predominantly the way they made sparkling in South Africa. So we coined the name Method Kap Klassiek, or just for short, people refer to it as MCC. So the Brut Rosé that's in your glass was only introduced in 2004, and it immediately caught on and has definitely grown by leaps and bounds. Now, what makes this wine very special and very interesting is that it contains 3 different red varieties. Obviously, one would think that Pinot Noir would be the main component, but it also contains some Pinotage, which seems to be a thread that's running through the whole tasting tonight, because it is truly South African. It is the variety that was developed, and the crossing was actually made here in Stellenbosch at the university. That makes up about 34% of the assemblage, and then last but not least, 2% of Pinot Meunier, which is the other classic champagne variety. So Pinot Noir 64%, Pinotage 34%, and 2% Pinot Meunier. The color is really light because we use all the classic methods of doing whole bunch pressing in the cellar. Everything is hand-picked, brought to the cellar in small bins, and then directly into the press, where we separate the juice into the important juice fractions. Firstly, obviously, the cuvee, which is roughly about 520 liters per 1,000 kilograms. And then there's a press fraction that is made and kept separate. If you use only the cuvee, the color comes out very light, even though you're using black grapes, because you're only extracting the juice from the pulp of the grape and not so much the pigments from the skin. So that's why we separate the juice fractions, because the harder and the longer you press, more color is extracted, making the second pressing much darker in color. Now, then basically the fermentation is in tank, and then after the primary fermentation is completed, the wine is blended, normally during the early parts of winter, and then it's ready for bottling. Sugar is added and yeast, and the second fermentation, or the prise de mousse as the French call it, happens inside the bottle. The style of this Brut Rosé is essentially to be very fresh and fruit driven, and that's one of the beauties of the wine. I always think when you drink rosé, it's not to have a frown on your forehead. It is for the pleasure and the enjoyment. So the aim is to keep it young and fresh and not to have too much of these secondary maturation and evolution flavors on the palate. So this is the 2016, and we also keep the dosage levels quite low. So the more sugar you add with the dosage, the more it dampens the fruit, and that is exactly why we keep it as dry as possible. So the residual sugar is only about 5.5 grams a liter. It also makes the wine really food friendly because it doesn't have that much sugar in the wine. So if you ask what kind of food you have with this Brut Rosé, I think because it is so fruity, and I think that's one of the contributions that come from Pinot Tosh, because it's maybe not as delicate as a base wine as the Pinot Noirs. It's got big fruit intensity, so that's why we have to keep it in check and not use more than about a third of the final blend. But food-wise, I always think of something like sushi or sashimi that's cool and fresh, but you can also have it through the meal, but of course at the end of the meal there's nothing wrong to have it with a berry fruit dessert or like strawberries and cream, because the flavors tend to match really well.
And what about some oysters?
Oysters, we also have other wines in the range. There's nothing wrong with using rosé with the oysters, but we also make a Blanc de Blanc as well as the Kaapse Brut, which is Pinot Noir Chardonnay and Pinot Meunier. So there's a wine for every occasion in our lineup. Okay. All I can say is cheers.
Johan, we have a question from Deborah Parker Wong in her class. She's asking, is low autolytic character the goal of most producers or the most commonly made style?
Sorry, just repeat that first part.
I'm sorry. Is low autolytic character the goal of most producers or the most commonly made style?
Okay. Initially, when the Cup Classique Association started out, and there were regulations that was in our wine of origin scheme that said the minimum time to have wine on the lees in the bottle was 9 months. The Cup Classique Association has now, for the past 3-4 years, sponsored a research program to follow the evolution of the autolysis and how it influences the character of the Cup Classique, and that's now been put into practice. So in the pipeline is an extension of that minimum of 9 months up to 12, and then a few years later we're going to 15 months. I think it's common for most wines to be relatively young and showing quite a low level of autolysis and secondary flavor development on the yeast. But there are also wines that are made in prestige cuvée categories or Blanc de Blancs that have spent 5 years and longer on the lees, where you will find there's a lot more of that nutty, buttery character that develops over time.
Okay, and Lisa's asking, what is the dosage?
The dosage is, well, I said the residual sugar is just over 5 grams a liter. The dosage we make from some base wine that we keep from the previous year, and then sometimes it's a little bit aged, and then sugar with a little bit of sulfur dioxide to act as a preservative, preventing oxidation.
Okay, that's wonderful. Any other questions, by the way, if you have them, we can always ask afterwards. I'll be here, Johan will be here, and we can answer you folks if you need to via email. So if we miss any questions, we will get back to them. It's just we're going to move it along a little. So now they would like to talk about the Chenin Blanc, which really is what started it all here at Simonsig.
Okay, right. In 1968, before that time, the wines were made on the estate and then sold to big merchants who bottled it under their brands. And that was the big step when my father decided to have his own label and bottle his own wine. And at that stage, we were only number 5 in the Stellenbosch region. Nowadays, there are over 200 private producers with their own label and with bottling their own wine. So it's something that has really grown tremendously. In those days, we didn't have all the classic varieties of Europe, like Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blanc, Riesling. So Chenin Blanc was always the mainstay of the South African wine industry until quite recently. It made up a third of our national planting, which in total is about 105,000 hectares. More recently, it's dropped just below 100,000. So it was a variety that was used extensively because it's really well adapted to our conditions. So the first 3 wines he bottled were Stien. As one thing I saw in the US is that most people in the US who know something about South African wine know the name Stien. So I think the people doing the education over there has done a good job to teach people Stien and Chenin Blanc is actually synonymous. So then the Chenin Blanc was the first wine we bottled with. The second one was a Claret Blanche, and the other one was a Riesling, but it was actually not the Riesling that comes from Germany. It's a variety that was named incorrectly in South Africa, actually called Chenin Blanc. So this year is 2018, so we're celebrating our 50th year in the business of bottling and selling our own wine. And to commemorate this, we put together a very special bottle of wine with a label that is basically a copy of the exact bottle that was used in 1968. So this is like a German Hock bottle, only this one is a Magnum, and the label is exactly the same as that we used in 68. My mother still stuck the labels on in the needlework room with a little brush. So we really started very small. South Africa then became a democracy in the mid-90s, and then all of a sudden the world markets opened, and what is more better known as a South African wine, it is Chenin Blanc. So suddenly the demand and the popularity of Chenin Blanc started to grow, and we were perfectly positioned to make use of this growth because we've been doing it for such a long time. We've planted a lot of Chenin Blanc vineyards, and some of them are quite old. So the style of the Chenin is really based on the older vineyards, and also some of these vineyards are untrellised, or we call them bush vines, and in France it's referred to as a gobelet system, so untrellised, no wires and no posts. And our style of Chenin is basically to pick the grapes at optimal ripeness, but also on the riper side of the medium. And then that gives us fantastic flavors, good tropical fruit when the wine is young, and when it gets a bit older, you get a lot of the sort of honey baked apple characters that makes this a wine for all occasions.
Michael in Santa Barbara is asking, either for Johan or maybe Francois wants to answer this, what is your #1 export market?
Well, for easy answer, it's Sweden. It's mainly for Chardonnay, and then the Netherlands. It's mainly Chenin Blanc, and then also Russia is a good importer of our MCC. So it differs from country to country.
Wonderful. The other thing I just wanted to let you know, the comments from everybody on the first wine, on the Caps Van Kel Rosé, have been fabulous. I couldn't even write them down so fast about how much they appreciate it. And they were all saying that, you know, bubbly particularly, not a lot of people in the United States think about South African bubblies, and they really should. One wrote, they really, really should. So that's wonderful, certainly a testament to Simonsig. And the US has been up and coming. I know things, you know, have moved, there's so much competition, but it actually, I think things are really starting to turn around. I think we're seeing it in Chenin, we're seeing it in Sauvignon Blanc actually, which we don't have with us today. And also, of course, with the Caps von Kell. That's actually, for us, that's always one of the ones that everybody seems to ask for and go to. I'm sorry, you can continue.
I just wanted to add that, you know, we're in April, so we've just finished our harvest about 3 weeks ago. So in about 4 weeks' time, we will start bottling the 28 vintage of the Chenin Blanc, which means that this wine is now almost a year old, so it does develop a little bit more deeper flavors, but a very fresh estery primary fruit of a young Chenin has subdued in this wine. But not to say that they don't last well, because a week ago we opened the 2009 Chenin Blanc and the wine was still in fantastic condition after 9 years.
This is, Chenin Blanc is such an important variety in South Africa, so this is really our mother's milk. And also, you can drink it any time of the day, especially end of the day to wash the dust from your boots, or at the golf club with some ice. So it is a very refreshing style of wine.
Okay, are we going to move on to the first red wine? So I'll hand over to Debbie to introduce the first red wine to you.
And before you do that, I just wanted, Debbie, since we got their background quite a bit, but we really didn't get into your background at all. Just tell them a little bit about how you got into wine and how you got here.
Hi everyone. As you know, I'm Debbie Thompson. I've been working for Simonsig for 18 years. Yes, it's quite a lot. I finished my studies at the University of Stellenbosch. Simonsig was looking actually for a red winemaker. I applied as an assistant winemaker because I only had one stint of harvest at Harsendal Estate. And I think Johan took a chance on me. I was the first female winemaker working at Simonsig, so it was a big challenge for myself. And I think it was a huge challenge for the people that was working with me. I must say, 2000 was my first harvest, and now we're sitting at 2018. And the reason why I'm still at Simonsig, I think it's a fabulous farm to work at. Even though I am the red winemaker, I'm also part of the pressing cellar, so that means I bring in the grapes for the sparkling wine, for the white wine, and of course for the red wines. And it's such a great opportunity for a winemaker because everything happens in one property. So from picking the grapes in the vineyards, bringing it into the cellar, bottling it, labeling it, and we've got our own container bay. Everything is under one roof. I think your exposure as a winemaker is tremendously, and especially being a red winemaker there, tasting the 2015 tonight, as you're going to taste with the red wines, you see the vineyards evolve over the year, you're seeing the wine evolve over the years, and pretty much red wines only express themselves after a year or two, and just to taste the fruits of your labor. So that's a little bit of background about myself.
Okay, we've got 3 red wines lined up, and all from the 2015 vintage. And although in South Africa the variation between one vintage and the next is not always as dramatic as you would find in Europe, for instance, because our climate is Mediterranean, and in general our summers are warm and dry, so there are not always difficulties with lots of rain during the growing season, especially during the harvest, which makes our wines quite consistent. But every now and again a really superb vintage comes along, and then It is just when everything works out perfectly, you get a vintage like 2015, which is generally regarded as one of the very best vintages since the 90s, I'd say, and some people say the best vintage they've ever had. So it depends on how extreme you want to go. So we're going to see 3 different reds from a really, really good vintage.
I fully agree with you, Han. I mean, working 18 years at one facility, I must say 2015 just rings all the bells, from the fruit concentration, the color with the red wines, the tannins coming together, everything's superb. Now, we're tasting the Simonsig Pinot 2015. I must just add, Pinot is a truly South African variety. It's been planted in 1925 by Professor Abraham Isaac Perold. And I must say, from 1925, this grape variety just evolved and evolved over years. And I can just say it's one of my grape varieties that I absolutely love working with, because due to its versatility, we in Stellenbosch got a certain climate, and the fruit that we capture in this specific Pinotage is truly mulberries and plum flavor. If you move towards, I would say, cooler areas such as Hermanus and Elgin, they get more the candy floss, more strawberry flavors. So coming back to the versatility, I think when you taste the Pinotage and you truly have to nail it down, some people actually get confused sometimes. Is it a Pinotage, and do we use a little bit of wood? They might get confused and say, yes, I can get the Pinotage, but I smell a little bit of, maybe there's Shiraz hints coming through. But just to bring it back with the 2015, when we started going back to the harvest, it's very important when picking Pinotage. We go into the vineyard, we taste the berries, and literally we follow the progress of the ripening stage. And Pinotage is one of those varieties because we use we use trellis systems, and Johan was mentioning the bush wines, which is where the grapes are low to the soil. So usually we pick the grapes around about February, end of February, or mid-February, end February, which is really hot in South Africa. So with a bush wine, due to the grapes being so close to the soil, you literally, we taste it on a Wednesday, we taste it on a Thursday, and we say, okay, no, it's Friday, it's not ready, and it always catches us on a Saturday. So it's just one of those things. And very important, if we go into the vineyards, we literally take the berry off the bunches, we chew the berry, we look at the color of the skins, we taste the pips, and you look at the flesh of the berry. And that's all the indication that will tell us, is this grape ready to pick? There's 2 things. You can either pick it early, then you'll get green flavors, and that we don't want, or you can pick it really late, and then you get jam flavors that we don't want either. So you really have to pick it at the right moment, and that's where you'll get that juicy mulberry plum flavors, and which is very important with Pinotage, is that it has to have a ripe tannin structure. Because at the end of the day, the juice of the berry, the tannins, everything comes together. And the 2015 Pinotage has a little bit of wood. I think 15% of the volume has a little bit of second fill barrel. And I think that just finishes off the aromas on the wine.
Yeah, maybe I can just jump in here. That Pinotage is a crossing that was made between Pinot Noir as a noble classic variety from Burgundy, and the other one was Cinsault from southern France. But Cinsault in South Africa was known as Hermitage, so it became Pinotage. That's where the name comes from. And interestingly enough is that Pinot Noir's got a very thin skin. Cinsault or Hermitage has got a very thick skin. So Pinotage inherited the small berry of Pinot Noir, but the very thick skin of the Hermitage. So it is something that you have to be very careful of not overdoing. So our procedures and fermentation technique of Pinotage is completely different to all the other reds like Cabernet Merlot, Shiraz, etc. So we have a very short period on the skins because the thick skin gives you an abundance of color, an abundance of tannin. So Debbie can tell you that it is on the skins quick, and then pressing to get the right kind of character.
I think, like Johan mentioned, it's so you've got a feminine side and you've got a masculine side, and the two comes together. And the question was arguably, is it a more feminine wine? Is it a more masculine wine? I think it's a combination of the two. When we've picked the grapes, we bring it into the cellar, we crush and destem, we take it to we've got two open top fermenters, literally 10 tons in the fermenter, and then we will punch it down every 2 hours. And then throughout that duration, it will only be 5 days on the skins. And of course, we'll taste. And when we find we've extracted enough color, enough fruit, and enough tannin, we'll stop that. And usually time spent is 5 to 6 days, which is very different from Cabernet, which we will leave up to 9 and extended maceration till 20 days. We'll press, and when we press, we'll taste at the press. I mean, I can strain again. What we're looking for at Pinotage is fruit, good tannin, and of course then the acidity comes together, and that gives the wine the longevity on the palate.
I've got a question, and this is actually a question I've just had over the years from consumers whenever I pour this wine. The smoky character, where does that come from? They always say, oh, it's aged, and I keep saying, no, it's not. I say it's the terroir of South Africa. Am I right?
I just want to add, from a viticultural point of view, Pinotage is a prolific bearer of fruit. If you have a bush wine or a goblet, the production is anything from 6 to 8 tons per hectare. So that gives you a very good concentration of fruit, and that is for the top-end market. But when you have it on a trellis system, you can harvest anything from 15 to 17 tons per hectare. So that style is more lighter in style, and also you can make very good rosé style wines.
To get back to your question about the smokiness, I've encountered that so many times, and it's always baffled me a little bit because I don't know. Because for us, we've never made that association of a smokiness. I always thought the smokiness or the toastiness that happens or you pick up in the wine comes from the toastiness of the barrel, which we'll definitely see more of in the second red wine, the radial Pinotage. But it seems to be an impression that is out there. So I guess it must definitely have something to do with the terroir and where it comes from, because it's very the association is very strong.
So we're going to move on. The next one we're going to taste is the Simonsig Radial Pinotage 2015. The main difference between the two is, I would say, the first one is more your medium-bodied, where the Radial Pinotage is much more full-bodied. This specific wine, where does the name come from, radial? Francois was mentioning the roaming red hills. Literally, this vineyard is, I would say, 2 kilometers just behind our cellar. It's got the most beautiful soil. And one thing I need to mention is that if you look at the Stellenbosch area, we're sitting with superb soils, and specifically for Pinotage or for red wines, we've got weather-chilled soils, and it adds a perfuminess to our wines. But coming back to the Radial Pinotage, we've been making this wine from, I think the first 1997 was the first vintage, and my first harvest was in 2000, and I was just coming back to mention that Pinotage is evolving and moving forward. It's not just your medium body. We make full-bodied, red-blooded Pinotage, red wine style, and it's been competing up with other wines throughout the country, and I would say globally, where Pinotage is making a statement that it's out there, and it's a great wine. Coming back to its versatility, again, mulberry, plum, various flavors, and specifically with this wine, when it comes to making it, I was telling you about going into the vineyards, we taste. I would say 100% of this wine is bush wine, the goblet. So the berries are quite close to the soil, less fruit bearing, so much more concentrated fruit, concentrated color. We bring it into cellar, and I would say 90% is made in open top fermenters and either or rotor tank. Now, what is a rotor tank? It's basically a round tank. It's automated. Every 2 hours we can set it, it turns, or every 4 hours. And basically, again, how do we determine how long time on the skins? Again, it's a short period of fermentation, 5 days to 6 days, and then we press. We taste at the press, and when we feel, okay, this is now, we've got everything we need, we make the cutting. This wine then goes, finish alcoholic fermentation in tank. It does a malolactic fermentation, and then we take it to barrel. 15 months in wood, and then it's a combination of 66% French oak, and the rest is American oak. The reason why we're introducing American oak in 2003, I was building a stack of barrel. We needed an extra barrel, and the only barrel that I had available was American oak barrel. We tasted through the evolution of the wine, and it just brought something special to the wine. It adds extra characteristics to the wine. Enjoy the wine.
Yeah, the very first red wine Simonsig ever bottled was a Pinotage in 1970. Even before we had a Cabernet or a Shiraz Pinotage. And if you think about it, that the first commercial Pinotage was only bottled in 1958. It was very soon after the very first commercial bottling of Pinotage happened. I think that long time of working with Pinotage has taught us a lot. And the worst thing that you can do is just treat it the same as all the other red varieties. You need to pay a lot of attention to limiting the yield, and also be very careful not to pick it too early or let it over ripen on the vines. And then, of course, in the cellar, a short, compact, concentrated vinification and short time on the skins. Otherwise, the wine becomes totally unbalanced with way too much tannin. And the two styles, the first one is very fruit-driven, very soft tannins, and then second, the radial comes from a specific vineyard site that gives us low yields and beautifully concentrated fruit coming from the small berries. So we'll push that a little bit longer for a slightly bigger structure. And then a lot of new oak is used. So this essentially is also a wine that requires quite a bit of cellaring for all those components to integrate and become one harmonious whole. So up to 10 years or longer is not a problem, because if you look at Pinot Noir, the grape variety doesn't have huge amount of color or tannin, but a great Pinot Noir can easily go 30 or 40 years. So for me, Pinotage definitely inherited that characteristic from the Pinot Noir. So even this, the first one that hasn't got such big structure and is softer, they mature really beautifully. And I think over time they show quite a bit of characteristics that reminds one of Pinot Noir.
We have a question, Johan, from Gabe. Considering the importance of Pinotage in South Africa and its genesis as a hybrid, how big of a role do Pinot Noir and Cinsault as distinct separate varieties play in South Africa?
I can think that Pinot Noir is definitely a variety that has got very particular requirements as in concerning where you can plant it and where you can make high quality Pinot, and that has taken South Africa quite a bit of time to discover, and definitely new areas were discovered further south, closer to the sea, higher altitude and so on, to get cooler mesoclimates. And I think that has enabled us to make really high quality Pinot Noir. As far as Cinsault is concerned, it really went out of fashion completely and basically disappeared from the scene until quite recently, when some of the younger generation winemakers almost went back to the old traditional varieties and revived the importance of Cinsault. And it is now suddenly quite sought after. The other thing that's important about Cinsault in the years when a lot of blending took place, because Cabernet was seen as a shy bearer, it wasn't that abundant, nobody really grew that much of it. Cinsault was always seen as a variety that was blended with Cabernet, basically to increase the size of the blend. And so that was almost like a traditional South African red wine, would be a Cabernet with some Cinsault in it. And one of the prominent growers in Stellenbosch told me that when he was growing up, they had a row of Cabernet with some Cinsault vines at both ends. So it was almost harvested together, and like a field blend, harvested like a field blend. So Cinsault is back on the table and making quite a big interest as far as red wine is concerned.
I just want one thing, don't refer to Pinotage as a hybrid, because it's not a hybrid, it is a cross between Pinot Noir and Cinsault.
Yeah.
But it's not referred to as a hybrid. A hybrid is completely something between different genuses. Yeah.
It's, a hybrid is if you make a crossing between Vitis, two different Vitis species. Vitis vinifera is wine grapes. Then you get other Vitis. Lambrusca is something they use a lot in the eastern part of the US. So if you cross vinifera and Lambrusca, that's a hybrid. But if you make a crossing, it's vinifera and vinifera.
Okay.
Okay, now we're moving on to the last wine. It's called the France Milan. And this wine was first released in 1994, the same year as South Africa had its first democratic election, and we became a proper democracy. So it's quite a significant year in the history of South Africa. The footwork for this wine actually started in 1991, when I made a small experimental wine using Pinotage in a new oak barrel with some Cabernet and Merlot, and decided that it would be interesting to see what happens if you blend these three varieties. The actual final wine was quite a revelation, and 3 years later, in 1994, we made the first wine for the commercial market and named it after Frans Milan, who was our father and the founder of Simonsig estate. Since then, the category of, or this style of wine has become known in South Africa as a Cape blend. So there's a framework that determines of what the wine has to contain, or the percentages to qualify as a Cape blend. So ours is mostly Pinotage. In actual fact, 2/3 or 67%, and then Cabernet Sauvignon 29%, and 4% of Merlot. For me, this blend is successful because when you take a Pinotage like the Redil and you mature it over time, the wine develops quite an intrinsic sweetness, not sweetness in sugar, but sweetness in its aromatics and its flavor. It's quite often a way that you can distinguish when you're tasting blind, what is a Pinotage? It's got that sort of a savory sweetness on the palate. But Cabernet is the one that has the tannic backbone and the structure. So our aim is always to find that sweet spot between the sweetness of the Pinotage and the backbone and the dry finish of the Cabernet, and that would be the starting point for the France Milan. And then, of course, Merlot is a variety that just its contribution to the blend is to make every blend better. So it's always the one that I always refer to it as the glue that keeps all the components together. So Debbie knows the vinification better than me.
I think if you're talking about blends, it's a great challenge for a winemaker to make a blend so that all the components come together. So basically what happens is when it comes to harvest time, we harvest the Pinotage on its own, obviously, the Cabernet and then the Merlot. And those vinification will finish on its own. We will keep it separately, and then it will go into barrel for 6 months on its own. We'll taste the blend, and usually end of November, beginning of December, we will taste the 3 components. So what we'll do is we'll find the best Pinotages, prepare that together, then we will introduce the Cabernet Sauvignon, and I kid you not, to finalize a blend, we go through various of tastings. It's not 1 or 2 tastings, we'll come to 10 tastings to see the matches. So Johan was talking about a sweet spot. So we'll introduce the Cabernet to the Pinotage in percentages, and we'll narrow that down, and then later on we'll introduce the Merlot. And I think it's like trying your culinary hand at a gourmet dish. You've got the 3 components, you have to add them together. The Merlot is like the salt and the pepper, putting everything together. And I think for any winemaker sitting and tasting the wine, especially being at 2015, is when all those components come together. You've got the sweetness of the Pinotage, you've got the cigar box or the lead pencil that's inherent of the Cabernet, and the Merlot gives you that dry finish. And those 3 just knit together, and it's spent 15 months in barrel. We use 90% was French oak with a dash of American oak. And to add that, again, that's also adding like salt and pepper. And then you have to be a little bit like a fortune teller, because this is 2015, we're tasting it in 2018. And when we made this blend in 2015, when I started off at Simonsig, I always tell the story. I was tasting with Johanna, and then I said, I want to blend this because this is accessible now. I want to make this wine and bottle it. But you can't, because this wine is still a youngster. It's going to go extra 11 months in oak, then it's going to be in bottle, and then for another, I would say, 6 months to a year in bottle before you get to consumer, buy the bottle, pull the cork, taste the wine, and then all of those, everything has to come together. The fruit, the tannin, the length, the structure, and of course what gives the wine the longevity is the tannin structure. So you actually, when we blend this wine in that specific year, you actually overplay your hand, because you're looking for more structure, looking for more flavor. So we're sitting here tonight, we're tasting this wine, and then for a winemaker to taste the 2015 today, I think when everything comes together, that's a thumbs up.
I've got...
Okay. For me, this wine resembles a pregnant lady. The backbone, the structure comes from the Cabernet, and the promise of fruit and youthfulness and the sweetness of the tannin is the promise from the Pinotage.
I just we got a note from Deborah Parker Wong and her class. Is fabulous.
Highly appreciate it.
That is fabulous to hear. You know, just briefly, again, I know you talked about the 50th anniversary and what we're doing, showed that beautiful label of the, from the first Chenin Blanc, which I don't know if the camera can really get that, but that is extraordinary. If you hold it up, Francois? Yeah, oh, Johan. That is really just a beautiful label. But one thing about the Chenin, Gabe had asked earlier, and we're hoping to get this in, has Chenin become more important over the last 50 years, or is it kind of holding steady? What do you guys, how do you think?
Very good question, thanks very much. I think because there's always been so much Chenin, it never really got like a prominent image And it was always, whether it was Chardonnay, which was relatively new, or Sauvignon Blanc. But in the past few years, a lot of work has been done by the Chenin Blanc Association in South Africa to improve not only the quality of Chenins across the country by introducing a Chenin Blanc Top 10 competition, but also by doing a lot of work in the market to improve the image of Chenin. And I think that enticed a lot of the growers and winemakers to put a lot more effort in the vineyard. Firstly, I think getting lower yields for better concentration and improve the quality. And the changes and the improvement has been incredible. So there's definitely been a huge upswing in the popularity of Chenin and the focus. So the other thing that has become very important is that because we had so much Chenin for so many years, there are a lot of very old vineyards of Chenin where the yields are low, the concentration of fruit is fantastic, and that has become like a national treasure. So there's a program going to protect these wines, almost like listing them as a heritage site, so that people don't just uproot them because the yields are low and they're not financially viable. And I think that is a very positive development to support the quality of Chenin. So yeah, Chenin is definitely the signature variety of South Africa as far as white wine is concerned.
Fabulous. I know we are really just about finished. If you have any more questions, you can always, of course, you all have my email address. You can email me, and as I said, we'll talk to Johan and Francois and Debbie and everyone and get you all the answers you need. If you have any last-minute questions, something that you might want to ask. Yes, Francois?
I just want to explain that little seal on the neck of the bottle.
You do that.
Yeah. Now, this shows two important things. It's certified by the Wine and Spirit Board about, first of all, that it's certified wine of origin, the varietals, and also the vintage is certified. But now we also introduced as an industry that it is IPW certified. Now, what does that mean? And that is, in South Africa, the industry as a whole have the integrated production of wine scheme. And that means that we produce the grapes in a sustainable manner and we look after our environment and with minimal interference in the vineyards. So we get audited yearly, and this is to certify that the wine is produced in also that traceability is quantified. So we fully comply with this IPW system, and that's why we have these seals on the bottles. It's a quality assurance about traceability and origin, and what you see on the bottle is actually true.
Wonderful. Now we would just love to do one last thing, and that is raise a toast with the Kops van Kel. Guys, go ahead in.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you all so very much.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. And we have a saying in the wine business in South Africa: the wine always tastes best under the roof it was made. So please, this is an invitation. If you ever come to South Africa, which is an absolute must, please come and visit and see if my saying is true.
Cheers, guys. Cheers, and thank you all very, very much.